Okay.
Recap. Residents, wait, what?
Voting fits into
voting fits into your life. You can vote for president.
who is the leader of the United States. Representatives, they pass legislation and laws.
City council.
They pass city ordinances and laws for the city.
Governor.
He signs bills into law for the state. Propositions are pieces of legislation for that they send to the voters to for change.
Taxes. Every time you go to the store or pay a bill, you pay taxes on top of that. And you get your roads fixed and you get your kids to school and your for your kids to learn.
Next slide.
Okay, and I'll cover this one, just a short recap. Who can register to vote? You must be a citizen of the United States and at least 18 years of age at the time of election in Missouri, at least. So you can be 17 and a half when you register to vote, as long as you'll be 18 by the time the election rolls around. There might be more restrictions to consider if you've maybe committed a crime or if you have a guardian or if you're a ward. You have to be registered to vote 27 days before an election day to participate in that election. Some of the restrictions that I was talking about a little bit earlier, if you've been convicted of an election offense, you cannot vote. If you've been convicted and have not completed sentencing and probation or parole, you can't vote. If you have been convicted of a felony and you've completed your sentencing and probation and parole, you can vote and you're technically off paper. Now, if you are in a guardianship, which a guardianship is something that places someone else in charge of the well-being related decisions of another person. And if you find yourself in a guardianship, you need to check the guardianship order and see whether or not you have retained the right to vote. The guardianship order will specifically say that if it was ordered after 2018. If it was ordered before 2018, you need to talk with your guardian and see if you have retained that right to vote. If you have not retained that right, you can talk with your guardian, write to the probate court, and talk to your doctors for supporting evidence to get that right reinstated. You can also find legal assistance with organizations like my own, which is the Missouri Protection and Advocacy Services, just to repeat that. So that's just a little recap. You can also register to vote at the Secretary of State website and the county clerk website. And I see Vincent has joined us. Welcome. Welcome back.
Hi.
Okay. So,
Did you want me to take this like I did yesterday?
yeah. Yeah, it was great.
So yeah, I noticed, and I saw in here we have Diana again. So I don't know. I know that we had a discussion about this particular piece yesterday. So I'm wondering if do we know who the cell phone is? Because I was wondering if maybe they wanted to have a discussion about this today, since Diane and I already kind of talked about it yesterday.
I'm not sure who the cell phone is.
Yeah, because we had talked about different methods to vote, and I mean, the most obvious one, of course, is going to a polling place, which is going to mean that you might have physical, architectural accessibility issues, or you could have issues with the accessibility of the voting equipment. So we talked about that about that quite a bit yesterday, but there are other ways to vote. You can vote mail-in or absentee. You could vote absentee at the election authority's office before election day. Or you could vote absentee by mail, or you could vote mail-in, which is going to have some additional formalities, like it's going to need to be notarized, stuff like that. But I didn't know if there were any areas of interest there that we might not have talked about yesterday. So, I mean, if we don't get any other comments about it in the chat or on the audio here, then Diana, did you think of anything else that you wanted to talk about regarding accessibility issues?
No, those are the main ones. In the chat, it says Vincent. Is that the person on the phone? If you want to chat again. Right, yes.
I don't know, because Vincent's me, so.
Oh, okay, never mind.
I'm
I
not
don't-
sure if the phone is I'm not sure if the phone or Lisa are connected to audio. I saw that Lisa was maybe struggling
Yeah.
to connect to audio earlier. The phone should
Okay.
be, as far as
Okay,
I
So,
understand. the phones
but
work.
yeah, I mean, if it is just Diana here, then I was gonna say, like, did you have any other issues that came up? Because we talked a little bit about not only accessibility and going to a polling place, but also the fact that the mail-in voting options are not necessarily accessible either, because you would, if they're all on paper, you would still have to rely on someone to help you fill out a ballot.
right.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of accessibility issues to think about, and I think part of the problem is that we're just so far behind the times here in Missouri as far as, you know, making it easy for people to vote, that I mean, a lot of these discussions are just, they're not going to get very far because people are so used to doing things the way we've always done them, which is just arcane for most other states. I mean, like Colorado, for example, they're all mail-in. So, I mean, really physical accessibility at polling places isn't as much of an issue because typically everybody votes by mail anyway, or uses a drop box. You know, so I mean, there's even accessibility issues with those drop boxes, but you know, when you're talking about something like that, it's just like, wow, how much easier must it be to get a ballot in Colorado than it is in Missouri?
You know, it's, to me, I print it out ahead of time. I go over it with either staff or family, and I make my marks on what I want ahead of time and take that in and match it up.
Right.
But how many people do that? How many people have that capability? How many people even have computers in rural communities to be able to do that? And that is a problem. People with under 200 or 200 people in a community, you know, don't have that accessibility capability. We can get laptops, tablets for children all day long.
Mm-hmm.
But for adults, it's unheard of.
Yeah, it's interesting because you say that, you know, if you're talking about a rural community that doesn't have access to,
Wi-Fi or hotspots.
yeah, I mean, the same sources of information that we do even. I mean, it's like, you know, what amount of education is going to solve that problem? I mean, it's, even if you tell people like, hey, guys, develop a plan for election day, you know, take a look at the candidates and issues beforehand, make a plan, you know what you're going to do when you go into the voting booth, you know, have your stuff ready. Like, you know, that's what we typically tell people, like, know where to go, know what time you want to be there, like expect it, you know, anticipate that it might take a while, you know, stuff like that. But then again, if you think about like a community like the one you described, where it's people living out in the country and there's what, 200 people in town, like, how do you get them to do that? Like, what if they don't have a computer to even look up the candidates and the issues beforehand? Like, I mean, so you could tell them about making a plan for election day, but if they don't have the means to actually prepare, then what do you do? Yeah, that's an interesting question. Because I think, it's the 21st century. So we think like, oh yeah, I mean, there's the internet and everything's available now, but what if you don't have internet, or what if you don't have a computer, or what if you don't have a printer? So yeah, it's weird because a lot of these, I think you're right. I think a lot of these communities are probably going to be made up mostly of voters who are going to go into a polling place and see these things for the first time. And if you've got access issues, then it's going to be increasingly difficult for you to comfortably fill out a ballot, I think. So yeah, I mean, what do you do in those situations? That's not I don't know if there's an easy answer for that, but it's certainly something to think about. I mean, Chris and Gary, did you guys have any thoughts about like, what if you were in that position where you lived in a place where, you lived out on, some gravel road and you didn't have internet, and, okay, it's the first Tuesday in November. I know that's the day that I go to vote. I know I'm registered. What would you do in that scenario to prepare yourself for an election? How would you go about doing that? I mean, it's just kind of like an interesting thought experiment.
Well, it's not like you can put it in a glass bottle and give it to a bird, and the bird flies it up. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
But
Right.
because I used to live in a rural county, Gower. Yeah, it was hard.
Yeah, I mean, I think it means you probably have to work a little extra, but I mean, I don't know if it's entirely impossible to learn about candidates and issues and, your obligations as a voter. I think you just have to work a little bit harder. And I think that maybe it's, on people like us to work a little bit harder too, to say, hey, here are the expectations, and then here's what you might have to expect, in order to fully engage in the electoral process. So,
Okay, you call, a lot of places will say, call for a ride, we'll bring you in, so
mhm.
you can vote, right? So they pull up to your house and you're in a wheelchair.
Right.
What happens then? Oops, we cannot help you. We do not have accessible capabilities,
Right.
and we cannot help you fill out a ballot because we are only drivers. Bam,
Right.
you cannot vote.
So this is something that I think is another good thing to think about, which is that let's assume that there were a service that would both transport people to a polling place and assist them getting in the polling place and assist them in filling out a ballot if they needed it. Okay. That would have to assume that the organization that was providing the service was aware of all the accessibility that could potentially arise during that whole process, and they'd have to have the means to accommodate those access issues. And here's the last part: if they're going to be assisting multiple voters, then they need to have sufficient personnel to help people in the voting booth. Because here's the kicker: we might have mentioned this a little bit on one of the first sessions, or maybe yesterday. I don't know if you were still here, but there's that state law that says that you can only help one person per election. So assuming that people needed assistance in the voting booth, the driver or assistant, or, whatever you want to call them, would only be able to help one person in the voting booth that day. Otherwise, they would be violating state law. So here's the thing that
Whoa. One person a
Okay.
day?
So hold on. This is the issue. And this is coming up. See, this is something that we've tried to address with several different centers for independent living. When I say we, I mean MoPNA and in partnership with a couple of, but hold on before you start talking, because I want to get through this point. That state law in Missouri says you can only help one person per election. There's a similar state law in Arkansas that says you can help up to 6 people. And that law in Arkansas is being challenged right now as unconstitutional. And it looks like the district court judge agrees that law is too restrictive and unconstitutional. So that basically says that the law in Missouri is similarly unconstitutional and unduly burdensome for voters with disabilities. But the problem is, now before I finish this thought, the problem is that when we go to organizations and say, hey, what about this law? Would it make your job easier if this law were changed? Would you like to help more voters fill out a ballot? Would you like to help more voters in a polling place? Most of the time, the response we get is, well, we don't get a whole lot of requests for that. We get more requests for transportation. So they say, well, that law doesn't really affect us too much. So what I'm saying now is if that law has impacted anybody, please let us know that, because those are the exact kind of stories we're looking for. So when you're like, oh my God, how can this law be out there that you can only help one person? Like, how is that possible? If we could get a specific example of how that has impacted somebody's ability to vote and vote independently and secretly, or with the help of a trusted supporter, then those are the stories that I want to hear. So go ahead.
Okay. A person can have a disability at any age, any time, any moment. So here, the 2 gentlemen up above me and me, mine was from birth and going forward. The veterans coming back with missing limbs and everything else, they may need supports at voting. So you're telling me the state of Missouri at a ballot place, they're only able to help one person at one in a day to vote.
Right. That's why again, it seems like if 6 is a problem, then 1's got to be a problem, right? But it's just a matter of finding the people who are like, yeah, you know what? These are the stories that we want to know about, because they've got to come up. Now, the problem is, though, that again, people aren't aware of this right to assistance. So, but here are the stories we want to know. I wanted to go take a group of people with disabilities. Now, this could be like a social worker, maybe from a long-term care facility, or maybe just from, some kind of other day program or something, whatever. A person wanted to take a group of people with disabilities to a polling place or to their polling places and help them understand the ballot and help them fill out the ballot. Okay. And, of course, obviously the people who were receiving the assistance had requested it and wanted it too. But I couldn't do that because I can only help one of them. I couldn't take, so let's say, Chris and Gary wanted to take another group of self-advocates. Well, Chris and Gary can only help one of them, right? Well, Chris and Gary could each help one. So at most they could do 2. So at most Chris and Gary could help 2 people to fill out a ballot. Well, what if they had a group of 6 people? That's the kind of story that I want to hear, right? Not that I want them to be, to run into that issue, but I want to be made aware of it if that's the case. So That's the first part of it. The second part of it would be, I am the person with the disability who needs help, and I couldn't get it because, my, my nephew or whatever had to help his elderly grandmother or whatever, and he couldn't help me. Now, I'm going to say, though, because I used a family example, that there are exceptions for families. So if you are like directly related to someone, like it's your mom or your dad, then you can do more than one. So like you could help mom and dad. You couldn't necessarily help, second cousin and third cousin. You know what I'm saying? So if they're like, what's the, like, it's degree of consanguinity, or so there's a word like that. But if it's someone that you're directly related to, that doesn't count against your count of one, right? But yeah, so the stories that we want to know about are, again, and well, there's a third part of it too, but number one, I wanted to help people but couldn't, because of the law. Number two, I needed help but couldn't get it because of the law. And then number three is really, if the law were changed, here's what we would do. And we've had some discussions about that because, just because centers for independent living don't typically offer stuff like this now, they could. What if we partnered with the Center for Independent Living and said, hey, you know what? We're going to do one of these self-advocate trainings, and we're going to try and get 30 people on the call, and we're going to, as part of the training, we're going to say, let's go to a polling place. Let's go to a polling place and fill out a ballot together. Well, we would be able to do that if the law were changed, but as of right now, we can't really do that. So again, I'm just throwing all these ideas out there because this law is a problem, but it's kind of like people don't know that it's a problem yet. Because obviously we saw from your reaction, Diana, that you weren't aware of the law either. So yeah, but having said all that, I did want to look at the chat here too, because we did have, I think part of our mystery was solved, that we had somebody text us that says that they're having trouble with the audio, but they're interested in explaining the right to vote to individuals, and specifically obtaining or retaining or regaining the right to vote, and then also assisting voters with disabilities with filling out without really leading them, which is, I think, a good point. So I talk about the leading a little bit later. And as far as the guardianship piece, that might have been covered in the first part of the session one. So I'll just recap it real quick. Unless I'm wrong. Rachel, stop me if I'm wrong though, because if the guardianship piece comes up later, we can talk about it then. But if it's from session one, then we'll just do it now. Do you remember?
Yeah, it's from session one.
Okay.
And I recorded that, but if you want to cover it again, I think that'll be helpful.
Well, since I've been talking for a little bit, I don't want to stop you. So did you want to take that part real quick, just to do a quick recap of the guardianship stuff?
Sure. Yeah, I think I was actually in the middle of it when you jumped on the call, and I'm not sure if that was helpful for Lisa, but I can go over it again really quickly here. So if you are trying to help an individual who's a ward or in a guardianship, and they were placed in that guardianship after 2018, you can check their guardianship order to see whether or not they have retained the right to vote. And if they have, that's great. If they haven't, you can talk with their guardian and see if that's something that their guardian is interested in restoring for that individual. If the guardian is not interested in restoring that right to the individual, you can talk to the individual's doctors. You can gather supporting evidence, or evidence that supports that they have the capacity to vote and should be able to vote, because it's a lesser restrictive part of being in a guardianship. And then at that point, you can ask for legal assistance from organizations like ours, like Missouri Protection and Advocacy Services. I think Legal Aid does them as well. And there's a couple others. And then we would file with the probate court, and we would start some type of legal action to try and get that right restored to that individual. Excuse me. Sometimes guardians are really open to the idea of restoring the right to vote. If it's a public administrator, they're usually not. I mean, it depends on the public administrator that you have, but from my short experience, it has not gone that well if it's a public administrator. I've had to, start a legal action and go to court and all of that stuff. So Vincent, do you want to talk about your experience a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that even if you have the guardians on board or guardian on board, you're still probably going to need to show the court some kind of supporting documentation. So whether or not that's an affidavit from a doctor or a social worker or whatever, you're still going to have to put something probably attached to your motion or petition. Now, again, I mean, if it's contested, as in like, I can't say that guardians are going to say like, yeah, we oppose this motion. They might just say like, well, we're just going to defer to the court. That's usually what they're going to say. But I mean, even in that case where it's not a joint motion that can be granted summarily, I mean, it might take a little, but I think that typically speaking, that is going to be granted readily by probate court, because again, I don't think that probate courts are really interested in restricting the right to vote if they don't have to. Yeah, I mean, in my experience, the only couple that I've had have been in St. Louis City, and the probate commissioner just, granted them without us ever having to show up in court. But we did attach medical affidavits to each of the petitions, and I mean, it wasn't that difficult. But at the same time, I did talk to the probate commissioner about, hey, you've got all these forms online. Now, I didn't talk to the probate commissioner; it was his clerk. But you've got all these probate forms online. Why not put a restoration of the right to vote form up there so that people can easily fill it out and submit it without the assistance of an attorney? And they were like, well, we don't want to do that because we're worried about, like guardians taking advantage of it and basically using it as an opportunity to influence a person with a disabilities vote, or, just make it so that they essentially get to vote twice. Well, I mean, I get that. I get that there is an opportunity for somebody to be influenced, and I think that was part of that second or third question there in the chat was, how do you help somebody to fill out a ballot without leading them? Well, it's tough, but there are ways to do it. But then again, you can't always rely on people to, be aware of that. That the fact that, when you're helping somebody, that doesn't necessarily mean you're telling them what to do. You're helping them think critically about candidates and issues. So, yeah, I mean, I understood the probate court's reluctance to create a form for the restoration of the right to vote. I mean, I understand it, but I still don't necessarily agree with it. I think every probate court should make that process accessible. And, by putting a form online, it allows people to do that without, retaining an attorney to do it. I mean, even though they can get legal advocates for free from us to do something like that, I mean, it would be easier to do if you didn't have to retain an attorney to do it. But anyways, let's look at this. The question was, is there something that the DD Council and P&A can work on? Yeah, so the question became, what can the DD Council and the P&A do to help change that law we were talking about regarding the restrictions on the number of people that can be held per election? Well, the P&A is already involved with a couple of organizations on strategizing ways to do that. And part of that strategy involves, again, finding those people who have been affected or could be affected, or would operate differently if the law were changed. So that's again, that's the process that I'm talking about is I want to know, like, are there people out there who are like, yes, I'd love to help more than one person, or people are out there who are like, I'd like to get help, but I can't because my supporters already helped somebody else. Or again, you know, hey, we would like to have this program to promote civic or, you know, or engagement in the electoral process, but you know, we can't really spend the funds on this program until this law is changed. So again, that's my pitch for that. So if you know anybody or any organization that might fit either of those or any of those molds, then please give them my contact information, which I should put in the chat here anyway, and I'm going to do now. But yeah, Chris and Gary, again, I keep talking, and I know this is your guys' presentation, and I want you to go ahead and fill in whatever I've missed here. Rachel, if there's anything on guardianship we needed to add, please feel free to take the mic from me, so to speak.
The only thing that I would add is something that I forgot. Guardianship orders, excuse me, before 2018 will not specifically, well, they're not required to specifically say, so that might be something that you'd have to get someone else to look a little bit more into, whether that's talking to the probate court or, you know, having an attorney talk to the probate court. So that, just be aware of that. And I think the next slide is a great one for Chris and Gary to jump back in on. And we can talk about how we've all voted individually.
How do you vote? How did you submit your vote the last time you voted?
We went into the voting polling place. Yeah, polling place.
And submitted our vote.
How do you vote by phone?
So I ended up voting by mail because of the pandemic. And so that was fun. I remember mailing my vote and then calling the county clerk, you know, every day until they could confirm that they got my vote and that everything was fine with it and I sent the right one. And we talk about the difference between mail-in votes and absentee votes a little bit later, maybe the next slide actually. But that's how I voted.
Anybody else have a different vote? I mean, Diana, I know that you've told us about your experience, which was a lot. I mean, a lot of issues with it. But did anybody vote and maybe experience a barrier to voting? Just out of curiosity. I mean, I know Chris and Gary, we talked a little bit about that yesterday as well. But did you guys think of anything else that might have happened to you personally that made it more difficult for you or better for you in terms of getting your vote in?
Oh,
Just, we got our vote in and we put it in the machine and is that it?
So how many, let me ask you guys a question then. How many people were at your polling place, not counting the judges or the poll workers, just the voters? How many voters were at your polling place when you were there the last time?
I would say 20.
Yeah.
So how long did you have to wait in line?
Oh, not
maybe
not 5 seconds.
Okay, so you guys are lucky.
Yeah.
We are.
Yeah, my polling place in North St. Louis County is always got a line. So interesting. I mean, even in this last municipal election, which was like, I mean, God, there were 2 things on the ballot. But anyways, I think that's another issue that is not necessarily disability related, but it could be disability related when you think about it, that parts of, let's just say St. Louis, for example, parts of St. Louis where there's not as much money are not going to have as many polling places, and they're not going to be, it's going to be, I think it's going to be more of a challenge for people to get to polling places, just based on geographic location, proximity, and then also, you know, I mean, obviously, once you get there, if there are fewer polling places, there are going to be more people crowding the polling place, and it's going to be a longer wait, which is going to drive people away too. So, I mean, and this is nothing new. I mean, historically speaking, lower income communities are going to have fewer polling places. That's for a number of reasons, which I don't know if we have time to get into, but I did want to note though that that could be a disability issue too, because I mean, I don't know. It seems to me like you probably have a higher concentration of people with disabilities in lower income areas, but I mean, that's just my theory, but.
Mine is done at a low-income housing authorities building.
Mhm.
So it's accessible to get in and out, depends which way they let you go in. And they only let you go in one way. And the last time we voted was on like 3 issues. And there was, what, 3 people behind the table. And there was 2 people in there when I went in.
Mhm.
And they said Jasper County had the lowest turnout, you know, that they've had. Now, when the main election was going on, they had the highest turnout. So it
Mhm.
depends upon what the issues were.
Right.
You know, it was upgrading the 911 system and increasing the tax levy. Who's going to vote on increasing a tax levy? Come on.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, no, absolutely. The content of the ballot is gonna how many people show up. That's why every 4 years you're gonna see much bigger crowds than in the off years. But yeah, so again, unless we have any more comments about our experiences and, you know, what those things mean for us and for voters with disabilities, then Rachel, you can move it along.
Okay.
We've kind of already did this part, so you can skip this.
Mhm.
He wants to stop me.
Just maybe talking about the difference between mail-in or absentee. Did we cover that specifically?
We did, because we talked, I mean, like I said, we talked more about it yesterday, but at the same time, I did make a comment that mail-in voting is going to have additional formalities, but do you want to tell us really what the distinction is between mail-in and absentee by mail?
Yeah, I can go into that. To vote absentee by mail in Missouri, you have to fit one of the 7 available reasons, 5 of which do need a notary and 2 which don't. The 2 that don't need a notary are that you have you are incapacitated, or you have some type of confinement due to illness or physical disability, and the other is being at risk or have already contracted COVID-19. And being at risk is being 65 or older, living in a long-term care facility, having a serious heart condition, having asthma, being immunocompromised, having chronic kidney or liver disease, and having diabetes. And there's a lot of specific details. I'm not sure if we want to go into or not, but mail-in ballots are a little different. Mail-in ballots, you don't really need to have a specific reason, but you do need to have a notary. And like I said earlier, Missouri created the mail-in ballot option in 2020 to, prevent the spread of COVID-19. Mail-in ballots must also be mailed back. You can't fill them out and take them to the polling place. So they're mail only. If you do find that you don't have enough time to send your mail-in ballot back, or gets away from you, you can take them to the polling place, surrender them, and get a new ballot, brand new one. So if you don't feel like you're not gonna have enough time, you can surrender it. And there's other tiny details, but that's only in really specific situations.
Now, what are the reasons again?
For
The mail-in? What are the medical?
the medical. So you are at risk of, being seriously ill if you contract COVID-19. If you are 65 or older, if you live in a long-term care facility, if you have a serious heart condition, if you have asthma or a chronic lung disease, if you are immunocompromised, if you have chronic kidney or liver disease, and if you have diabetes. And I can put this in the chat too.
Because Rachel has all those memorized.
Yeah, I definitely have them all memorized.
Well, I meet
I
two
think
of
about them
them.
every day.
I meet two and, well, almost three.
But see, here's the thing though, which is, Rachel, now let me ask you about this. I hadn't thought about this yet. Because I said, oh, if you have an absentee ballot, you don't need to get notarized. If you have a mail-in ballot, it doesn't need to be notarized. Well, that's not necessarily true, because like you pointed out, some of the excuses for the absentee ballot don't need a notary, but others do. But
Right.
when you're talking about the at-risk category for a mail-in ballot, that's different from, see, I guess.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. So it's different from the absentee ballot
Right.
at risk, because when it's a mail-in ballot, mail-ins need notaries. That's just, I think that's a blanket statement. Mail-ins need notaries. If it is an absentee ballot and you are at risk, you do not need a notary.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Well, Diana, before you,
Confusing.
because I was going to say that the other thing to remember about this is that we're talking about, there's a distinction between an absentee ballot and a mail-in ballot, but those physical documents, those artifacts, they're the same thing. You're not going to be able to tell the difference. It's really only the manner in which you check the boxes and send it in that's going to tell the election authority whether or not it's a mail-in ballot or an absentee ballot. So that was another thing I wanted to remember. So like you could have an excuse to vote absentee that might also permit you to vote mail-in, but you would want to vote absentee because you wouldn't need the notary requirement in that case. Correct, Rachel? I mean, that's
Right, that's correct, unless they somehow decide to put titles on them or something. But for right now, I think that's correct, where you could plan to vote one way, you get your ballot, and if you can end up voting the other way, then that's an option.
so. Diana, what were you gonna say there? Because I know that you were gonna talk before I made that comment.
So with the medical conditions, you do. Okay, the words are so confusing. I call them lawyer words.
Yeah.
And doctor words. Would you agree, guys, when you get up there?
Yeah, I mean, Chris and Gary, let me just ask you, just like we've talked about this for a while, can you honestly tell me that you understand the difference between mail-in voting and absentee voting?
Well, that did happen to me.
It did
lost
happen to you.
Yeah, I lost my
Okay.
kidney. I lost my kidney in April, and that was the biggest year for a president, and and I couldn't do it because I was getting a new kidney.
But you voted absentee, right? Like you didn't say like I'm voting mail-in. You said I'm voting absentee.
I-
Voted absentee.
I couldn't vote at all because I was in Kansas City.
Oh, okay. All right. But okay, so anyways, Diana, the point we were making though was where were we going with this, I guess would be my question.
So if you have medical conditions, would you vote mail-in?
Okay.
And then you wouldn't have to
Right.
go to the bank and have it stamped?
Right. So that's what I was asking Rachel. I was like, well,
So-
if you have a medical condition where you could vote absentee or mail-in, wouldn't you always choose absentee because then you wouldn't have to get the notary? I mean, that's what seemed to make the most sense, right?
Right, because you don't have to prove that you have these disabilities or these
Right.
impairments or conditions. You don't have to prove that through absentee. But
Right,
with
you-
mail-in voting, you always need to have a notary.
Right.
So I went mail-in because I have a friend who's a notary. And so it's really easy to meet her in a park and, socially distance, get her notary signature. And then I mailed it in. But it took kind of weeks to set this up and make sure it got there. And it took a lot of attention to little details to make sure that it came in through. But absentee voting, if you have any of these conditions, you don't need the notary, and then you can just send it in and they won't ask you for proof. So it'll be easier that way through absentee.
Rachel, you brought up another good point though, which is that with the mail-in ballot, you have to get it set up and you have to make sure that you send it in enough time. Other good thing about the absentee ballot is you don't have to mail it in. You can take it to the election authority. But this is the thing that they don't, I mean, this is another layer that they don't tell you about, or they don't hear, is that when they say mail in, that means literally like you have to mail it in. But an absentee ballot, it's like you could go take it to a polling, you could have a relative take it to a polling place. That's where the consanguinity comes in. Like they have to be a certain relation to you. But I mean, it's easier to get an absentee ballot in than a mail-in ballot, because again, a mail-in ballot, you got to mail in, which means you're going to have to mail it in like at least a week in advance if it's going to get there in time.
So if I am confused about these words,
Mm-hmm.
and he was confused up there, I'm pointing up because he's up on my screen, he's up above me. Gary was, then how many other people in the disability world are going to get confused that they got to apply 10 weeks in advance and they got to get this put into their plan so that they'll order it and so they could get it mailed off in advance. And this is an awful lot of things to get done.
I'll tell you what I think the reality was, and you're having
It's just not going to be
how many people
feasible.
were confused by this process? Well, everybody, and this is what I acknowledged yesterday, is that
Everybody.
I was confused by it, and I'm supposed to be the expert on this stuff, right? And I didn't even know what the heck was going on.
Yeah, no, my entire community and we were all confused by it. I mean, it took like a group of people to figure out what Missouri was trying to say.
Right. But so here's what I think happened though. And because I read a story on CNN, the CNN website, that was like, there's so many problems with mail-in voting in Georgia, but then there were these other states where there weren't any problems. They listed Missouri. I'm like, that's a bunch of garbage, because I'll tell you what happened in Missouri is people were like, I don't know what the hell this is. I'm just going to go vote in person anyway, because I can't figure this out. You know, so
Yeah.
they made the process such a pain in the butt, no one even used it. They just did what they'd always done, which is either voting in person or voting absentee or voting, you know, as part of the permanent disability list. So people didn't really take advantage of mail-in voting because it was like, well, like I gotta mail this thing in and get a notary on it. Like, forget that. I'm just gonna do what I always do. So they said like, oh, well, Missouri didn't have any problems because nobody used it because it was confusing and nobody wanted to. So that, I mean, I think that's what ended up happening. But
Or they called it fraud if you mailed it in.
well, that's another question, which is like, how many of the mail-in ballots got thrown out because they didn't have the necessary formalities, right? We don't know. But then again, I'm going to tell you that I think it's more likely that ballots that didn't meet the formalities were counted as absentee ballots by the election authorities because the election authorities probably didn't know what the heck was going on either. So I don't think there was, and this is just my guess, I don't think there was too much of a problem with stuff getting thrown out because I think that they, again, how do they know? How do they know what the difference is between an absentee and a mail-in ballot other than what you've checked on there? So if somebody checked this is a mail-in ballot and it didn't have a notary on it, did it get thrown in the garbage can or did they just count it as an absentee ballot? I don't know. Who knows? I mean, yeah, there's a lot of good questions there.
Mhm.
I asked too many questions.
Well, I mean, it's not, you're not wrong though. I mean, and the saying that this is that there are these questions is not saying that like, oh, we just don't get it. It's just saying like, man, there are some serious problems with the way we handle voting in Missouri. I mean, that's the one
Can
thing
you ask a
painfully
question?
obvious. So, yeah, go ahead. Anybody else who wants to talk?
Vincent?
Yeah.
Can I was just wondering something. Can somebody have like voting ballot at the hospital if they do want to after the surgery or whatever they are there for?
Well,
Can they
yeah.
do that?
My answer is yes, but I think, I mean, a couple things that you mentioned, which is, can somebody get a ballot at a hospital if they want to
Yeah.
vote, if they're confined to the hospital?
Huh?
Absolutely. So, I mean, obviously being confined because of illness or, you know, recovery from surgery or whatever is, you have a reason to vote absentee, right?
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, I think we said that. But well, let's think about a different scenario though. You get hit by a car the day before the election.
Mhm.
Well, it's too late for you to get an absentee ballot at that point.
Yeah.
You're going to be in the hospital.
Mhm.
You're stuck in the hospital bed on election day. What can you do? I don't think that they like to do this, but if you put up enough of a fuss about it, you can get the election authority to bring you a ballot. Because you could say, hey, you know, here's what happened. I'm stuck in the hospital. This is just like a medical emergency. I don't want to miss the election though. Can you get me a ballot? And I've seen cases where they take it out to you. And this is like I'm talking about Kansas City too. So not small jurisdictions. So you can get them to do it if you ask the right way, because they're supposed to. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
We have two hospitals here in Joplin. They went to Freeman, they went to Mercy Hospital, and they had their family members bring them their IDs, their driver's license, made sure that they had them on one day, and they went completely through the hospitals. And as long as they didn't mail in a ballot or something like that,
Right.
and they double checked, and they took everybody's ballot door to door and did it.
Right.
Wow.
That's cool.
That was sweet.
That is cool. Now, of course, they get the other things, they had to make sure that people were also registered in time. but-
Right, they did.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's, again, yeah, so your question is, can you get a ballot in a hospital? Like, well, yeah, we've seen examples of it. And I mean, obviously you can vote absentee too, so.
Well, that was the main election. They did that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pleasantly surprised that they did that because I mean, for them having so many accessibility issues at the polling place, for them to do something like that is kind of cool.
But that was the first time ever.
Ah,
And I gotta laugh at that. I mean, and they put it on our local news. First time ever, they went in the hospitals. But now the COVID wings, the election officials, they trusted the nurses to go in there. They did
Yeah.
not go in, those people were on ventilators, so they didn't, they said, nah. If you can get no, we're not going.
yeah. So, and then of course, the comment in the chat here is absolutely right. That when they bring you a ballot, when I say they, it's going to be a judge from each major party, or there's going to be a Democrat and a Republican. But there's also another thing to note here is that the comment in the chat was that this person had a ballot brought to their home. So it's not necessarily you just have to be confined at a hospital. You could be anywhere, right? If you're confined somewhere due to injury or illness, then you can get that access to that ballot. So again, in the interest of moving,
Time.
yeah, I don't know if we want to get going.
Oh, yeah. So we just covered that. We pretty much covered this. Maybe we should talk about curbside voting.
So Chris and Gary, you guys have been with us. You've done 3 of these things at this point. Why don't you tell us about curbside voting?
You can,
You pull up and you go, and there's a button that you you have to push, and it will alarm in the building, and then the guy,
alert the
the
building.
alert, the person will come out and give you the pencil and the paper, the vote, the
Ballot.
ballot, and then you do the ballot, and well, you have your ID, of course, and they look at it, and then they give you the ballot, and then you mark what you want, who you want, for what you want, and then you give it back to the person worker, the ballot worker, and then the ballot worker takes it back into the building and puts it in a box for you.
Right. So, and then I know that you guys have a video example of that later. I don't know if maybe that's the next couple slides or not, but
Yeah, I was gonna ask if we should skip to it.
yeah, I mean,
Okay.
let's go through and see how far away it is, and then we'll,
It's about 5 slides away.
well, we'll just wait, I guess. It's up to you. It's up to you guys. This is your show, so.
It doesn't matter. It don't matter.
Yeah,
We
Rachel,
can-
let's go forward, and because we only got 15 minutes left anyway.
Yeah. Did you want to play this one, or you want to skip ahead?
Let's skip to the curbside one and then come back to the root poll worker one,
Okay.
because they've got examples of all the different ways to vote in these things, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
No, we'll do this one first then.
Okay, that's what you got today. And then here for you. Voting book. And here your ballot. Okay. And I'll take you in the box for you. All right, you have a great day, sir. Oh, you have here, all right? The COVID and everything. Okay. All right, thank you, sir.
I like in your video that
Megan,
he gave him the pen.
pleasure.
Yeah.
Pleasure. Maryland, Vulture, Harvard, Belt Haynes. What's from church? John C. Bacon.
What is the candidate's name in this video? John C. Bacon?
Fagan.
Bacon.
Fagan.
Oh, okay. You, okay.
Yeah.
Middleton, Virginia. Don't think so. Thank you.
Okay, so now before we go to the next thing, I wanted to say, if you looked at his video there, that was an example of him filling out his ballot at home and putting it in an envelope, and he was getting a little help while he was filling it out. But that reminded me of the question earlier, which was, how do you help somebody without telling them what to do? It's like, well, he said, I think in the video, he kind of said, like, who should I pick? And then, said, well, Chris pick John, right? Well, I don't know,
Yeah.
like, maybe the best way to do it, because you want to say, like, maybe it's good to ask the voter about, particular issues. Like, well, what are you interested in? I mean, this is a discussion we had before we did any of these presentations, is like, I say, well, like, Chris, what are the issues that are the most important to you? And, I think the answer ended up being like, something like access to affordable healthcare or something like that. So it's like, if you know about what's important to the voter, then you can say, well, why don't we look into this and see what this candidate, has to say about access to healthcare, or let's see what this ballot proposition might do for your access to healthcare. I mean, it's not like everything's always going to be, the connections are always going to be so readily apparent, and it's going to be easy for you to figure out, like, okay, this is good for, the issue that I care about, or it's bad for the issue that I care about, but it's still something to think about and say, like, okay, well, what do you value as a voter, and how are you going to, to voice your opinion, or, how are you going to voice those values your ballot? I mean, that's really the kind of thing you want to get at. Go ahead.
We really wasn't thinking that way. We were thinking about the one voter issue.
Yeah.
I personally, I think it should be as many as you want as a helper, the person is there to help you.
Right.
That would be like a volunteer going to a nursing home. You just don't pick your patients. You just help them do their daily bath or whatever
Right.
it may be.
That's true. But yeah, I mean, I think the question was really like, once you have that assistance, you know, or once you can give that assistance, what's the best way to do it? And again, I think it's really like, instead of telling people, like asking them questions, like, again, well, what do you think about this? What do you think about, like, maybe, you know, get as much background information on candidates and issues as you can and say, like, well, how do you feel about this? Here's where, you know, this state representative stands on, you know, Medicaid expansion. How do you feel about that? You know, so I think there's ways to ask questions to help guide people rather than leading them. But then, you know, I did want to mention that first before I forgot or ran out of time. But I also wanted to note in your video there were a couple other things, like, again, I talked about the envelope last time, is that there's probably going to be a special envelope provided by the election authority. And then it might have stuff to fill out on the outside of the envelope. And then with the curbside stuff, yeah, I mean, in your example, you had one guy waiting and ready to hand out curbside ballots, but it's probably not going to be that way. You're probably going to have to locate signage for curbside voting. And then, like you said, the buzzer to say, like, hey, come out here and bring me a ballot. And it's probably going to be two people, just like in the example here where two judges had brought a ballot to somebody's house. It would be the same thing with the curbside voting, I'd imagine. So anyways, I didn't want to take too much on, but did we have, Rachel, what did you want to do next here?
The rude poll worker video.
Right.
Hello, hello. Wonderful to see you today. Oh, I guess this is okay. I have a question. Yeah, what's the question? How do I make sure that the ballot counts? You come in, you just sit down and you circle the one you want, you put it in a box. Put it in that box, in a voting box, and you leave. Is there somebody else I can talk to? Well, I'll go back there and find out. Like I have all day. We had a little bit of fun anyway. That day.
Yeah. So why did you guys tell us about that video? What was that showing? What can we learn from that?
Well, they wanted us. We did one seriously, and we did the one not so serious, you know. And that one was sure, but that one was a little bit funny, you know, but rude, you know. We wanted to show people how rude other people can be while they're working.
Yeah.
But it's volunteering. But I personally think if you're gonna be that rude, you better pick somebody else to do. Don't work at the public a poll. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, you said it was a little bit of it was kind of a goofy example, but I mean, at the same time, it wasn't that far removed from reality. I mean, poll workers are going to be jerks sometimes. And
Yeah.
but the important thing, I mean, I think the important thing we talked about yesterday was, you know, it's that the more you know about your rights and the more you are comfortable self-advocating, then the less people are going to step on you, right? I mean, you're going to know how to handle a situation like that, and you need to be assertive, right? You can't just say like, oh, okay, well, I guess I'll just do this without understanding what's going on here. I guess I'll just fill this out without any help, right? Like, you know, you guys know enough now to say like, no, I know that if I need assistance with something that, you know, it's the election authority's obligation to provide an accommodation for me, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's important to be, even if you encounter something like that, to be assertive and to say, hey, I know what my rights are and I'm comfortable advocating for my rights.
Hey, I need help.
Right. I mean, it's that help might be, I mean, obviously within reason. I mean, it's not like they're, help you with like, hey, my car needs an oil change, right? Like, we're not talking about that.
Not talking
No,
about that.
no.
No.
Yeah.
No.
So at any rate though, did you want to talk more about the different machines, or is that, I was looking for the registration form here, so I'm coming back to the screen. Do we want to talk about this, Rachel, or did you want to?
Well, we've got the accessible voting screen, and then we've got the how to find your polling place screen, and then the survey question.
Rachel, you're the best at keeping
think-
us on task, so why don't you go
I
ahead and
think,
handle, just why don't you take it from here?
just skipping forward. And so we covered a lot of ways that we can have accessible voting and different ways that each polling place should have. You can check these requirements on the Secretary of State website or your county clerk website. I believe this screenshot is from the Secretary of State, but we already talked about most of these, so I'm going to skip ahead. That's the video we watched. You find your polling place by contacting your county clerk or contacting the Secretary of State. You can use their website or you can call.
Yeah.
So that this is where you can point people if they don't know where their polling place is. Some things to think about when you're planning your voting day or your voting week, or you're voting 2 weeks, depending on how you're voting. And then I wanted to get to the survey question because Vincent makes a great point here. Or at least he did last time. I'm not sure if he remembers it, but I remember thinking, wow, that's a really great point. Is have you ever been a poll worker? I have never been a poll worker. Honestly, didn't know until, midway through college that was something you could just volunteer to do. So has anyone else been a poll worker here?
No.
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 And no,
No.
can I ask another question, Rachel, before you make your comment?
Oh, no, I was waiting for you to make the comment.
Well, I don't,
Ask your
I don't
question.
want to, I want you to do it because I don't even remember what it was that you liked, but, the thing I was going to ask is, has anybody ever had an interest in being a poll worker?
Yeah, I'll do it
Okay.
once.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
I'm sort of interested, but not enough to go out and do it. But the thing I said yesterday was that I haven't done it, but I should have done it at this point. It really is kind of bad that I haven't. But Rachel, go ahead, and what was the thing that I said that was actually of value yesterday?
Well, I think what you were getting to, and then I think we ran out of time, so you didn't get to complete it entirely. But what I thought you were getting to was that, especially in more rural areas, there's not really a lot of discussion or dialogue about person to poll worker pipeline. Like I told you, and I grew up in a semi-rural community, I didn't know that that was something you could just volunteer to do until midway through college. And I had grown up in the same community my whole life. And there's not any kind of discourse or introduction to this in any of my classes. And there's not really any talk of it in the community at all, except among people who are already poll workers or who are maybe related to poll workers. That's my personal experience, is that I was just not really exposed to the option. And I'm sure in a lot of very rural communities, there's people who are poll workers and they just stay poll workers forever. It's always the same people, and nobody ever really thinks like, oh, I could maybe take one of those spots the next year. It's always the same people. And that might be kind of a problem. I don't know if those people really talk about the importance of their role and all the time. I mean, why would you? But also maybe you should. And that's my personal experience.
Yeah, and actually the hearing you say that, because you got something else interesting out of it, was that, you know, again, how do you make a pipeline of new poll workers, right? Or from the time they're eligible to vote, you know, why not tell people that the time they become eligible, like, hey, why don't you be a poll worker too? Like, it doesn't have to just be, you know, the people who are retired and got nothing better to do.
Yeah.
Get some different perspectives in there and get disability perspectives too. I would like to see organizations like, you know, Paraquad or Merrill or People First or, you know, whoever actually tell their constituents and say, hey, you know what? We want to have a presence at the polls. Why don't you, hey, people with disabilities, go out there and go be a poll worker, you know, expose the rest of the community to, you know, our perspectives and our issues. I mean, I think that would be great to have organizations actually encourage their constituents to do that. I don't know if that happens a whole lot.
I absolutely agree with you. I think having familiar faces be poll workers will encourage other people to vote, to make, you know, to do the planning of sending in your mail-in vote or absentee vote and, you know, actually really commit to it. If there's a familiar presence, you know, who's assisting you. It's kind of the same with young voters. It's like if there's one younger poll worker that they maybe know and recognize, they might be more likely to go. And that's the same thing with most communities. It's the familiarity of it. So yeah, I agree on that point, Vincent. It's that it doesn't have to be the same retired people for 10 years. It doesn't have to be the same person. And I don't think it should be. Even though I know that they love serving their community, there's many other ways they can do it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, you mandate jury duty, why not mandate poll working? But I don't know, that's, I don't mean like that's a good idea. What I mean is that, like, you know, one's as important as the other, really, in terms of, you know, engaging in civic life. So I don't know why, you know, you could say it's okay to make people do jury duty, but, you know, we don't, I mean, well, we can't get enough poll workers, and that seems to be fine with, so, you know, you see what I'm getting at. But anyways.
You know what? You're gonna get me off on a tangent. Jury duty and people with disabilities, they excuse you.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm done.
Yeah.
And there's one other slide I think I wanted to get to for Lisa. But did you have a comment, Vincent?
Well, Lisa did note here that the other thing to remember is that when you're doing poll work, it's you are getting a little bit of cash too, which is good. I mean, you're not just asking people to, I mean, it's volunteer work, because I mean, it's not like you get paid a whole lot, but I mean, you do get a nominal amount for helping.
So the next section is way to learn about candidates and issues. And I think Lisa had a question about how to communicate their issues without being partisan and influencing a vote.
Yeah, and that went to what I was talking about earlier, where, like, you know, maybe ask questions about what is important to the vote rather than just telling them. But here's another thing here that might be helpful.
What's your straight from the TV?
I didn't tell them people to come. I didn't tell them Polish people to come on the ship.
Okay. Because you're saying on the stimulus bill.
Stimulus bill? Well, I don't know why they're going to give poor people all of the money from the government. I'm going to fight it. What do you say about the COVID shot? I think people should get the shot when it's available to them. What do you think about the stimulus check? I think that's a good thing to put in people's hands that really need it.
So what was that an example of there?
That was an example about learning how candidates feel about different issues.
So, I mean, but I think the important thing was, I mean, that was essentially a candidate forum, right? Where you could interact with the candidate. But I think the important thing there is that, I mean, what happened? You guys asked questions and you were thinking critically about where the person stood on important issues rather than just some, you know, whatever information is fed to you from your, you know, your bubble, you know, or Facebook or whatever. So, yeah, again, asking about important issues, I think was key there.
Yes, it was.
I think we already kind of talked about this, like, again, what are the things that you value? You know, you're going to be thinking about when you vote. And I know we're 5 minutes over, Rachel, so.
That's pretty much the end. That's all we have as far as slides, except for the Go Vote one.
Yeah. I would say that, I mean, if you guys have any specific questions, I would say go ahead and feel free to email me or call me. I can put my thing back in here again. I'll do it one more time. But yeah, unless there's something real quick, I would say, you know, don't hesitate to call me if you have any questions about anything specific.
Great job.
Okay, well, thank you all for coming.
Thank you all for
Thank you.
coming.
Yeah, thank
Go
you.
vote.
I'll see everybody around.
Okay, see you all later.
I'll be in touch.